And welcome to this environmental value systems revision video looking at topic 1.1 foundations of environmental systems and societies. And today we're looking at environmental value systems. This will not replace revision itself, so strongly recommend watching this video with the revision guide next to you to make sure you have enough detail and information to fully answer any exam questions on this. So in this video, I'll be looking at 1.1, which includes the rise of activism. We'll be focusing on some case studies that you need to be familiar with, and we'll be looking at the spectrum of activism. And just to point out, whilst there are recommended case studies, other case studies other than the ones I talk about would be ideal, but you need to be able to identify certain case studies and refer to them in the exam. So this is following the following information. So you can see here that you need to be able to talk about historical events amongst other influences that affected the development of the environmental value systems, and you need to be able to look at the wide spectrum of environmental value systems, identifying which one each is and being able to compare the two. So this could be historical events from major environmental disasters to media publications to technological developments. You need to understand that the environmental value system is a worldwide view or paradigm, and it shapes the way individuals or societies influence the importance of the environment. And you need to know that an environmental value system may be considered a system that is influenced by education, culture, media, and all those points there. And you need to understand that there is a spectrum from ecocentric through to anthropocentric, which we'll be talking about during this video. And later during the video, I'll be referring back to this part of the specification, where it gives you direct definitions and viewpoints of these different environmental value systems. I think that's useful to be aware that that is in the actual specification for your revision. So if we start off with the very first bit then, environmental value systems, and what does that mean? Well, an environmental value system is a worldwide view that shapes the way either an individual or a group of individuals perceive or evaluate environmental value issues, or environmental issues, I should say. So this could be influenced by things like culture, economics, religion, socio-political backgrounds, okay, and they can change and be dynamic over time. And this graph shows you when studying different parts of the world and studying what people's opinions are, you can see that certain opinions are very divided and certain opinions are very the same. And this makes it difficult to develop environmental movements in an effective way because so many different people have different opinions. Now, where did this all come from? Where did environmental values develop? Well, that all comes down to a knowledge of history and human development. Environment has been important ever since humans really moved from being hunter-gatherers to growing crops and being agriculture. And then as societies developed, the environment has become more important. As we've damaged the environment, it's become more important. So this was first identified maybe in ancient Rome, where in ancient Rome the Romans actually lit so many fires that the pollution went into the air, the smoke blocked out the sun slightly, causing something called global dimming. And global dimming actually then cooled the climate in Europe. So the actual climate, we think, dropped by about 0.3 degrees Fahrenheit in this time. And that was because of soot and organic particulates in the atmosphere blocking the sun out. And obviously that changed when the Roman Empire sort of fell to bits. That then slowly went away. This has also been seen in China, India and Peru, where whilst farmers haven't realised it, they've been trying to prevent soil erosion for thousands of years, and this would have been a primitive form of environmental protection. In London, there is a history of very poor water conditions in the River Thames, and basically this got to such a point that there are outbreaks of cholera in 1832 up to 1854. and it was recorded that over 2,000 people in London were dying every week due to cholera as a result of the poor river conditions. And that was because sewage from the large city, which at the time was probably one of the biggest cities in the world, was being pumped directly into the water system without being. Now, as we go into the 20th century and sort of from the 1950s onwards, after the Second World War, environmental issues became more and more important. A lot of it sparked by the publication of Silent Spring, which we'll talk about in a moment. But as people became more aware of the environment, there became two sort of beliefs systems that had impacts. So some people felt that capitalism was the big problem, and that capitalism, which is where countries are where profits are gained for by big companies, and that they do anything to gain more and more profits. People felt that this was an evil, that the environmental that was affecting the environment, and people believed in capitalist countries that maybe communism was the way forward, because communism is where the government runs the state and everyone should be equals. However, this became sort of disproven as the Iron Curtain fell and as the Berlin Wall was knocked down, and it was noted that people from East and West Germany came together, and the pollution was much worse in East Germany, which was communist, compared to West Germany, which was capitalist. And the reason for that is simple: because it was communist, technology wasn't being developed. It wasn't continually moving forward to make cars more efficient, or machinery or power stations more efficient, because there wasn't the competition that you get in a capitalist country. So therefore, the idea of capitalism, communism, and one being good and one being bad for the environment, whilst it did drive forward the environmental movement, it actually didn't stand up in the test of reality. And this can be seen in this diagram, and if you're not 100% certain what the difference between capitalist and communism is, please use the Venn diagram. But effectively, the main difference is about the idea of who runs the companies and who sets prices. So what happened, as we said, was many felt that communism would prevent social ills like the capitalism system. However, we got these good examples here from East Germany, which had 10 times the mercury poisoning and the problem of carbon monoxide released from cars. However, there was some argument for it as well. Smelters had to be shut down in the spring as a result of not needing enough of the materials, and therefore it was actually healthier, the crops are healthier due to less pollution. So the systems didn't really support either way as a result. So you need to be aware of the different types of activist groups that are out there, and who can influence the environmental decisions that we make, and who can influence environmental change. So it could be due to individuals. So the example that we'll be looking at shortly is Silent Spring by Rachel Carson, which was a book which largely many people felt launched the environmental movement, and it also influenced lots of people, as well as causing governments to identify loads, in this case mercury, and change laws as a result. So that is an example of someone who could really influence the public. Then there are independent pressure groups such as Greenpeace and the WWF. They do environmental change through raising awareness, through raising money to protect areas, to lobbying governments. So they have a high impact on the environment. Corporate business, and you might think this one is a strange one, but corporate businesses have a reputation to keep, and as the world becomes more environmentally aware, corporate businesses have got to step up to be seen as being more greener companies. So this graph here, which shows you the different plastic footprints around the world, you can see companies like Coca-Cola and Nestle have got a very negative footprint, and therefore they have got to change their methods, because the public will not invest in them and continue to use their products unless they change their ways. Hence now Coca-Cola is using bottles that are made of over 50% plant material. Governments So governments obviously are voted in most countries by, in diplomatic countries, by the public, and the governments are responding now, especially you see with stuff like COP, to environmental awareness. So governments need to be making sure that they are supporting the environment, because if they don't, they may be voted out as a result. And then there are intergovernmental bodies such as the United Nations, which work in panels with other governments and set global targets for other governments to reach. And they may or may not be legal targets depending if the countries agree to them, but there is a pressure for all governments to be seen to be pushing in the right direction around the world. So all of these activist groups have an impact, and their impact could be they alter public opinion. It could be they alter public behaviour. Like, for example, if you read Rachel Carson's book, you may be less likely to use chemicals in your own garden, to the use of electric cars or to recycling, whereas public behaviour, again, can also be changed. Also, it can alter political choices. So particularly if ideas are raised where there's problems, if the government aren't seen to respond, they're less likely potentially to be voted into the future. So there are 3 case studies that I would suggest people know about. The first one is Rachel Carson and Silent Spring. And this was a book that was published in 1962. It is generally accepted as being the start of the modern environmental movement. Carson's basically looked at the use of pesticides in the US and looked at the fact that it could accumulate into something called bioaccumulation, which we studied later in birds, and that could lead to the loss of larger birds of prey. And she also suggested that DDT, which is the main pesticide she looked at, was finding its way into humans, where it would accumulate into fatty tissues, which increased the case of cancer. Now, this was just one lady who published a book, and that book became very, very popular. And initially, the chemical companies in the US tried to ban this book. That made the book more popular, so more people in public read it. And then US President John F. Kennedy, who read the book, ordered a scientific investigation which found evidence that DDT could cause potentially build-up in the food chain, and therefore DDT was banned in the pesticide use. And this would have also had a bigger impact on the general use of pesticides and being tested for their safety in the environment. So Silent Spring had lots of positive impacts. Obviously, it inspired people, such as the Vice President of the US from a few years ago, Al Gore, who came up with something called an inconvenient truth, that we'll be talking about in a few moments. But also it educated people, and it allowed people to think about what the impacts of their actions were in terms of spraying pesticides. Negative impacts, however, could possibly be in there as well, because many scientists feel now that the DDT evidence was not backed by strong science, and DDT was also at the time being used in the global fight against malaria-carrying mosquitoes. So since it was banned, millions of people have died of malaria, whereas we may have actually been able to eradicate the female Anopheles mosquito, which carries malarial parasites. Case study number 2 is Chernobyl. Chernobyl is a very famous nuclear accident that happened in a nuclear power station now located in Ukraine. It was when it was part of the former Soviet Union. It's the only accident in history of a commercial nuclear power station that has actually caused directly measured radiation fatalities. It was the whole accident was a product of human error and issues with the design, and much of the underlying circumstances particularly were not responded to soon enough, and the Soviet government tried to cover up the initial impacts, and therefore it caused more and more problems. And you can see here a map, or 2 different maps, of the radiation that was released, of across Europe and across the local country, and you can see there that it had widespread consequences, hence it was a very negative environmental. Chernobyl today was built in haste, and Chernobyl today is covered in a concrete sarcophagus, but this had to be built really quick, and it is sort of crumbling. So therefore, Chernobyl is being looked at now, and work is being done to replace this design because of the dangers of Chernobyl if that was to break. So you might be expected to talk about what were the impacts of Chernobyl, why was it so important? Well, this obviously raised public awareness of the potential risks of nuclear meltdown and nuclear accidents. And even though there's only been 3 cases where there's actually been issues to do with this across the world, 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima, this did raise public awareness, and it slowed down the progress of nuclear fission reactions being used around the world. Now, why that is either a good thing or a bad thing, it could be due to the fact obviously we've stopped that usage, which means this possibly hasn't happened again, and it has moved science forward, so we now make a lot safer nuclear power stations, and therefore this hopefully should never happen again. However, the negative side of this is that the world moved away from nuclear power. So currently we're in an energy crisis, and also the carbon dioxide that has been emitted from fossil fuels in power stations has probably been higher than it would have been if the world would have converted fully to more nuclear power. So you could argue that Chernobyl actually had a greater impact on climate change in the longer term, because we haven't invested around the world as much as we were in nuclear fission technology. So when we come on to environmental value systems, we need to be able to talk about the different categories. So effectively there are 3 main categories that can then be divided into further subsections. There are ecocentrics or ecocentrism, and this is nature-centered. So it's the idea that nature is got a value, okay, and people who are ecocentrics feel that there should be minimal disturbance of the natural process, that we should combine different ideas of spiritual and environmental aspects, we should have sustainability, and we should have a restraint on our way of lives in order to make sure we are being sustainable. You then have anthropocentrics, which are somewhere in the middle between the two of eco and technocentrics. And anthropocentric people feel that it is a people-centered environmental value system, believes it's important for everyone in society to participate on environmental decisions, and people should act to be managers of the environmental systems. People should do this through debate. There should be regulation due to authorities. Laws should be passed in order to look after the environment, and people should be able to have a demographic view and argue what is important and what isn't. Debate is heavily encouraged, and it should involve people at the centre, and because people are the most important part of the planet. Technocentric even is when technology is the centre of the environmental value system, and it should see technology as providing the solutions to the environmental problems. Even when humans push the natural system beyond the normal boundaries, technology should be able to keep in place and provide environmental problem solutions. It should be able to be doing, including resource replacement, okay, and natural processes should be controlled, and then technology and scientific research should allow us to sort any issues. So then we're going to look a bit closer at some of these terms. So technocentrics can be divided further into cornucopians or environmental managers. So a cornucopian often would be your sort of industrial leader, and they feel that humans are the most important species. We should have infinite resources, and that we can therefore control the environment, and humans have the ability to improve the conditions the Earth's people, and we have the cleverness or ingenuity to overcome any sort of problems. They see biodiversity as a resource which should be exploited, and the biodiversity should be used for our benefit. And they feel that capitalism is the best way, and there should be minimum government interference limiting what companies should do, and the market should allow growth, which will allow people to have strong economies and move forward. Effectively, what we're saying is, if you're a cornucopian, you believe that we're the captain of the ship and that we should steer the ship and develop and understand it. Now, not everyone who is technologist believes that, technocentrics believes that. Some people who are technocentrics are much more based around being environmental stewards. So they feel that humans have an ethical duty to protect and nurture the earth, and that technology can be used to do that. They feel that environmental issues need governments to manage and legislate them, and that limited resources shouldn't be overexploited. And support should be given to those who need it. So they sort of see it as the earth being a garden that needs tending, and we should look after the planet so it looks after us. Ecocentrics then believe that humans should not be the centre, that we should actually, it's in intrinsic importance that humans look after the environment because we rely on the environment. And more emphasis is therefore placed on nature than on humanity. There are different levels. So there is a deep ecocentric who believes that all ecosystems and habitats should be protected at a cost. We should prevent habitat loss, restore habitats, remove pollution, and deal with all the environmental global issues. We shouldn't damage the nature that there is. And basically, the ecocentric summary for ecocentrics is that Earth is here for all species. Resources are limited. We should manage our growth if beneficial, but we must work with the earth, not against it. We need the earth more than the earth needs us. And if you're struggling with this, because there are some key terms here, there are definitions in the specification for you. So here you can see, if we split it into sort of 3 to 4 groups, it says an ecocentric viewpoint integrates social, spiritual and environmental dimensions into a holistic ideal. It puts ecology and nature as the centre to humanity, and emphasises a less materialistic approach to life with greater self-sufficiency of societies. An ecosystem viewpoint prioritises biorights, emphasises the importance of education and encourages self-restraint in human behaviour. And as it said down the bottom, there are extremes at either end. You can have deep ecologists, which feel that at all costs environmental should be number one. An anthropologist viewpoint argues that humans must sustainably manage the global system. And this is done through use of taxes, environmental regulation and legislation, and debate is encouraged to reach a pragmatic solution. Technocentric viewpoint is that technology should provide the answer to our environmental conditions and problems. This is a consequence of an optimistic role humans can play in improving the lot of humanity. So there is this spectrum, a wide spectrum between deep ecologists who do not want humans to be the number one priority and think whatever happens we should save the environment, to cornucopians who feel the earth provides for us and we should use it for all we can. And there are others in the global environment who have different views, and a lot of it often depends on where people live, what their religious and cultural backgrounds are, and how they impact the environment. So, for example, Native Americans have communal communities. They often barter for goods, not money, and therefore they often rely on low impact technology. Laws are handed down orally from generation to generation, and religion often holds animals and plants as objects of spirituality. So therefore, generally, this leads to less environmental damage. Christianity and Islam have beliefs which means that the planet is important. So Christianity holds differing views that humans are masters of the planet, but humans should be stewards of the planet and look after it. whereas the Quran states that Earth has been given to humans for their subsistence, but humans are not masters and have been gifted it, they're caretakers. It recognises animals as equal to humans, and more emphasis is put on the trustee status of humans. The last environmental view is Buddhism, and this is the idea that the world is conjoined in four ways: morally, existentially, cosmologically, and ontologically. And Buddhists believe that all living things are dependent of each other, what we call interdependence in biology. Humans are not any more important than the animals and plants on the planet, and we must extend our love and kindness, therefore, to Earth, nature, and everyone in it. I hope that's been useful for you guys. Remember to look at the revision guides and use them to help you make sure you're convinced you can explain the different types of environmental value systems.